Yes, we are.
Okay. And keep your questions, write them down. We will get to them, I promise. Okay, ESL vocabulary. I'm going to remind you that in the pre-workshop, we talked about basic learners and we talked about ESL learners. And basic learners are native English speakers, where ESL students would be coming from, it's not English as a second language necessarily. It could be third, fourth, or fifth, depending on where they're coming from, but it's learning English language learners as opposed to the basic student who already knows English and is probably more focusing on fluency and comprehension. So this is ESL vocabulary. In ESL vocabulary, I like to think that vocabulary is king. And what does that mean? It means that the vocabulary component is probably going to start off most of your lesson. Especially for beginning ESL students, this is the building block. This vocabulary is what they need before they can worry about grammar or sentence structure or almost anything else. So it's very important. It's a very, very important part of your lesson plan. The learning objectives, we're going to talk about 7 different principles, general principles. We'll learn a couple important instructional techniques. We're going to learn some additional activities, fun and games that you can play with your students, and talk about one problem area that students have with learning English. Next slide. Thinking about vocabulary. Okay. Vocabulary is defined as the collection of words that we use, that we know the meaning of when we hear, say, read, or print. Did I say write? Hear, say, read, write in print or orally. We use vocabulary to receive knowledge and to express knowledge, but it's not just one thing. As you can see, it has 4 components: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The listening vocabulary contains the words that we understand when we hear them. This is the first type of vocabulary we learn as little kids, as small children. And I think you might have been in the position where you say something in front of a small child thinking, he doesn't understand it. I've never heard him use this word. But in fact, they often do know the word. They just don't speak it, because the listening vocabulary is usually much bigger than the speaking vocabulary. Sometimes we have this expression, little pitchers have big ears, because the child will repeat something and you're going, oh, how did he know that? I didn't know he understood those words. Don't always assume that because the child hasn't used the word that he doesn't know the word. I mean, we do the same thing. So that's the listening vocabulary. The speaking vocabulary is used to express ourselves out loud. A person's speaking vocabulary is a lot smaller than the listening vocabulary. Together, the 2 of them make up what we call the oral vocabulary. Why is it important to have a large oral vocabulary? Because it is the basis of communication. And it also helps reading, and we'll get into that in a little while. The 3rd type of vocabulary is the reading vocabulary. And of course, these are the words that we recognize and understand when we see them in print. People develop a large reading vocabulary by reading a wide variety of content. Unfortunately, this is a catch-22. The more words this person or student knows, the more reading he'll be doing. A limited vocabulary limits the amount of reading that they do. That's why we push hard on vocabulary, to extend their reading vocabulary. I don't have to probably explain too much about the writing vocabulary. It's obviously the words that we use when we want to write, either you know, on the computer or in hand. It's smaller than the reading vocabulary, just as the speaking is smaller than the listening. But together, the reading and writing make up the print vocabulary. So the 2 main types, oral and print. It's really important to know and understand both of them. Now, for native English speakers, I have been explaining that the listening vocabulary is usually bigger and the reading vocabulary is bigger, but this is not necessarily true of an ESL student. For example, many learners can understand oral English and perhaps speak it better than they can read it or write it. But for some, it's the other way around. Perhaps they're quite comfortable reading English or even writing it, but they can't make themselves understood out loud because they don't know how to pronounce it. One of your jobs as a tutor is to figure out which is a student's strong and weak vocabulary areas.
Okay,
Next slide.
this tree shows the relationships of the elements of reading. And vocabulary is at the roots of the tree because it's necessary for everything else. Excuse me, whether you're listening, speaking, reading, or writing English, knowing the meaning of words is essential. Now, when you're assigned a student, your coordinator will brief you on the student's prior literary experiences. Can the student read and write in their own language? Excuse me. If so, does that language use the same alphabet as English? Things to find out from the student might be what particular needs and goals have brought them to the Literacy Council to learn English. Do they want a job? Or maybe a better job? Do they want to read with their children? Do they want to pass the driver's license test or maybe the citizenship exam? Knowing these things will help you decide what to teach your student. The general principles of teaching vocabulary are few, but they're really important. First, teach only a few new words at a time. It depends on your student because there's a big difference between students in how quickly they pick things up, but a good target to focus on in a lesson is to perhaps present 8 to 10 new words. Second, choose one way to say something and then stick with it. This may change as your student becomes more advanced, but at the beginning, stick with the one way of saying something. For example, if you want to teach an expression for turning off the light, pick one simple common expression and use only that, turn out the light. Don't give other versions like switch off the light or turn the light off. Third, use a consistent process for introducing new vocabulary. The consistency in the process will make it easy for students to identify the new words. For example, when naming objects, say, this is a book, this is a pencil, this is a chair. Don't suddenly switch to saying, we call this a book.
Explicit instruction describes something that is very clear and unambiguous. The opposite is implicit, which means understood but never really written down anywhere. The more explicit your vocabulary instruction is, the better off you are and the better the results will be. So what does it mean to have explicit instruction? It means, first of all, there be an explanation. Explain where and how students will use a word and phrase. For instance, I'm going to be teaching you today a list of words that will help you in the grocery store. Or this conversation is going to help you meet your new teacher. So give them the explanation of how the words are used. This is also known as setting a purpose for what you're teaching them. Secondly, you want to model the word. You have to use the phrase several times. A guided practice should be part of your instruction. Ask the student to repeat with you as many times as you need. The guided practice is the guts of the activity or the exercise. And finally, application. Ask the student to use the word on their own. So that every vocabulary activity should have those 4 elements involved to be explicit. One of the type of explicit instructions is called a substitution drill. This is an activity that models vocabulary using a visual cue. For instance, find a book, okay. You hold up the object. This is the visual cue. This is your vocabulary object. And you make the listen. This is a book. This is a book. This is a book. The next step is to beckon. This is a book, and then you beckon, and the student should reply, this is a book. The teacher will do it again. This is a book. And the student will repeat. Instead of reading this, let's do this, Catherine, okay? I'm going to be the teacher, and you'll be the student. Ready? This is a book. Whoops, I forgot. Listen. This is a book. This is a book. This is a book. This is a book.
This is a book.
Good. Do it again. Repeat. This is a book.
This is a book. This is a book.
Oh, good job. I didn't have to repeat it. She knew right away by beckoning what I wanted her to say without modeling. Now do it again. This time I'll say, what's this?
This is a book.
Good job. So you go through that. You could do it with pen, pencil, table, desk, chair. You know, after a while you think, oh, this must be driving them crazy. It's so simple, but it's not. It's key. You forget that you've been learning your vocabulary since the day you were born. This is new. So repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay. You can do the same drill using a vocal cue instead of a visual cue. With maybe a more advanced student, you'll just say, this is a book, and then the student will repeat from you. You don't need to hold it up. That's just a variation on that same substitution drill. Next slide.
Yep. Okay, so we've talked about the first three principles on this slide. Now we're going to talk about a fourth. Putting vocabulary words into context really helps a student understand and remember the new words. So the next series of slides are an example of a way to do this. All of our learners bring with them a lifetime of experience and knowledge. For example, there are things that most adults do. They get up in the morning, unless they work the night shift. They make meals, they do chores around the house. You can use these common activities to help students understand what they're reading. Say you're about to read a short passage with a student. Before reading, you can provide some context for the passage by talking about the picture. Ask the student about the picture. For example, where is the woman? What is she holding? What will she buy? As the two of you talk about the picture, the tutor can provide new vocabulary when the student doesn't know how to say something. Then the tutor can read the story with the student and can continue with more questions during and after the reading. This process gives the student context for the reading passage and provides new vocabulary from the passage. It also gives the student practice answering questions. The Literacy Council has great picture dictionaries, and sadly, I don't have one at home to hold up. Particularly the Oxford Picture Dictionary is just great, that you can borrow or even buy from us if you want. Our tutors love to use them during lessons, and students also usually have Google Translate on their phones so that they can use Google Translate as another teaching aid. You'll want to follow up the reading with reinforcement of what the student learned. An after reading activity could be a writing assignment. You might write another story that takes place in the grocery store, maybe a little story about asking a worker there where to find something. You could use blanks for part of the story, like the example on the slide, and have your student choose from a list of words and phrases to complete it. This gives students a chance to practice writing the words and phrases that they learned earlier, and then an opportunity to read another story when they finish. You could also follow up orally. You could record one of the sentences from the passage into WhatsApp on your student's phone and have them record it later as homework to send back to you. I don't know whether any or all of you have WhatsApp on your phone. It's a great tool. We can talk about that in more detail later.
Okay, the fifth general principle is to use several examples for clarity. Now, I know earlier we said when you're teaching something such as turn off the light, find one phrase and stick to it. This is a different case. This is where you're teaching a word like cup, which is a class of objects. And you might want to show a big mug, a little tiny dainty cup. In other words, what you have to do is to explain to the student that there's more than one thing that looks like a cup. The next slide is another example.
Wait for it.
Wait for it. Okay, what do you think we're teaching in this slide? Let's have, can somebody volunteer? Anybody, shout it out. What word, what concept, what vocabulary term are we teaching?
Yellow.
Yay! Yes, yellow. I thought I might have a smart aleck who said brown, but no, it's definitely yellow. And it's great. The students are going to understand then that all of these 3 items are yellow, and you can do that. And it, you know, remember when Carolyn and I were doing the Amarous and I had that image of the ship to help me remember that letter? This is another way to associate images with vocabulary terms. It works and it's great. Next one. Okay, the next 2 and the last 2 general principles. One is use repetition. To permanently learn new words, students are going to need them to hear them and use them over and over again. I use the 3R mantra, which is repeat, rehearse, reimagine. You don't have to remember that, but the idea is repeat it, use it in a dialogue, rehearse it, and reimagine means the student uses it in a new context, in their own context. That's how I try to keep track of it, the repetition. Here's an example. You're helping a student prepare for a job interview, and you're going to teach vocabulary related words such as application, manager, interview, and thank you note. You present the vocabulary. That means you rehearse it as a comprehension exercise. And you have the student reimagine it later in original sentences. In the next class, you can review the words through a game, a dictation, or a role playing. Don't teach a word only once. You want to spiral back and use it again. That's basically repetition. Finally, you want to link a principle to an authentic or real application. We've already talked about this. Students are motivated to learn when they see a reason to do it, when they see how it affects their private life. So if you can, when you have vocabulary, make sure that it's authentic, that you're not just teaching off a list of words that a student should know. Let's see, what else do I want to do? I tell you what, let's lead right into the next activity, which is a total physical response. And this is very important. I think that Catherine's going to teach you about this one.
I am, and I love this little video that we're about to watch so much because this is a great teacher. She's teaching obviously not one student, a whole class, but you can do it with one student as well. So TPR is shorthand for total physical response, and the tutor uses actions to show the meaning of a word or a direction. And then here she has the students copy her or do what she's doing, and it allows the student to learn by association and also performance. I mean, you know, with their whole bodies. Again, think about a 3-year-old child. She can't understand every word you say, but she often knows what you mean. She can follow simple directions and respond to the names of objects. And she learned all this by association as she watched family members do these things and use these words. The conversation between the tutor and the student at the elevator is very similar to that. Now let's look at this video of this great teacher.
Total physical response, or TPR, is a technique that uses body movement to help students understand and remember new vocabulary. It is thought to lower anxiety and facilitate learning by connecting language to a physical movement. In this activity, teacher Libby Costello uses TPR to introduce and reinforce action verbs. Libby incorporates this activity as a warm-up from the very first day of class.
So listen, repeat, and show. Cook. Cook. Eat. Eat. Drink.
Libby starts with 5 verbs. She says a verb, acts it out, and asks students to repeat. While new verbs are added in subsequent classes, Libby reuses all the verbs throughout the cycle so that students become very comfortable with them.
Run. Walk.
As the cycle progresses, Libby incorporates verbs that are specific to each life skill unit. She also expands the activity to include work on verb forms, pronouns, and possessive adjectives. Here, Libby has students practice using the present continuous.
I want you to listen, repeat, and show me. Cook. 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 What are you doing? I am cooking. Eat. 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 What are you doing? I am eating.
With a slight variation, students practice using personal pronouns.
Cook. 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 What are you doing? I am cooking. What is she doing? She is cooking. What is he doing? He is cooking. What are they doing? They are cooking. Eat. 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 What are you doing? I am eating. What is Isaac doing? He is eating. What is Blanca doing? She is eating. What are Roberto and Berta doing? They are eating.
It is very common to use TPR with commands. By using the imperative form of the verb and adding questions, Libby provides practice with possessives.
I want you to listen, repeat, and show me. Write your name. Write your name. Write your name. Write your name. What are you doing? I am writing my name. Good. I am writing my name. Very good. What is Freddie doing? He is writing his name. What is Daisy doing? She is writing her. What are Roberto and Mercedes doing? They are writing their name.
Okay, I think that's really great. And I also like the way she uses that for repeat. I'd be tempted to do that myself, but that's up to you. So again, when people connect language with movement, it's easier for them to remember the words. And also, don't let an unexpected golden opportunity pass you by. I don't know whether Charmy's still on or not, but this is an example from her. Let's say your student notices that their phone needs recharging while you're with them. A student at the beginner's end of the spectrum probably would gesture and, like that, but don't let them get away with that. Don't just point to the wall outlet. This is the perfect time to stop everything else you're doing for that lesson and practicing things like my battery is low and plug it in. As you begin working with your student, you'll be amazed at how often you automatically use some form of TPR to communicate with them. And don't forget games. So concentration is played like the regular card game, but we have cards that are match sets with one having a picture and the other has the printed word. It's great for reviewing vocabulary. Bingo is like the regular version of bingo, but the numbers in the squares are replaced by vocabulary words. You can use crossword puzzles. We've got them in our literacy library and also all kinds of puzzle books that you can borrow. You can make photocopies of the pages. You can also just Google ESL Vocabulary games for lots of ideas. Okay, here's a list of tools that will help in teaching vocabulary. Look at the third bullet. We want to talk for a minute about making a personal dictionary. Give the student a notebook. At the top of each page, have the student write one letter of the alphabet. As they learn important words or phrases, they can write them in the notebook, along with definitions or translations or pictures or a sentence that uses the word, whatever they think will help them the most to remember it. One of our tutors, this is what my script said. This was actually me. I used a personal dictionary with a student who worked in a care facility for the elderly. She could speak English pretty well, but she had a lot of trouble writing, and she needed to leave notes for the caregivers in the shift after her. She decided on a list of words that she really wanted to know how to spell. We went over them together, and we made a little notebook with just a few words, maybe 2 or 3 words on each page, so that she wasn't assaulted when she turned the page by a whole long list of things. And then it was a small notebook, so she'd keep it in her pocket and just flip through it to review the words and how to spell them during her coffee break. And the final tool, whoopsie, I went too soon. The final tool, use your phone to record. This is great. You can record yourself and your student on your phone. Your student, almost all of our students have phones, and almost all of their phones have recording capacity. I mentioned WhatsApp before, and I don't know if you know it, it's a great messaging application, and it's really easy to record things on it. So when you record yourself on WhatsApp or any other recording application, it can go, well, if you record it on WhatsApp, it can go to their phone instantly because you can send it straight to them. You can record a word or more even from your home. Your student can listen. They can record themselves repeating what you said and then compare what they hear you said with what they hear that they've said. You can both listen and compare. And then after practicing a dialogue, you and your student can, if you want, record the whole dialogue for them to listen to and practice at home. The recordings help them remember the meanings of new words, and they really allow them to practice pronunciation by comparing your recording of a word or a sentence with theirs.
Okay, we talked a little bit in the past about the challenge for teaching ESL students. Well, one of the most challenging issues is idioms. Now, I wouldn't worry about idioms with a very, very beginning student, you know, maybe an intermediate, because you don't want to take a beginning student and confuse them completely. But it's really a piece of cake once you understand what you're doing. You don't want to beat around the bush with the student either. Now you see what I'm doing here, right? If you came into the classroom and it's raining outside, say, hey, it's raining cats and dogs. Incorporate in a very natural, contextual way, when you can, idioms. We have a lot of great references for idioms in the Literacy Council as well. Again, I said the key is to teach them in conversations and in context, rather as a list of, you don't want to, you know, here's a list of idioms that we're going to learn this week. No, I wouldn't do it that way. I would do it gradually, more naturally. Also, the thing you can do, you can talk about idioms. I'm not quite done yet, but that's okay. We can talk about idioms, and we can ask them, do you have idioms in your language? And every language does have them. And they're pretty funny. I know we say we can buy a pig in a poke. Have you ever heard that? Now maybe it's just us elderly people who know that. But to buy a pig in a poke is to buy something before you've seen it. In France, they say, what was it? Oh, a cat in a bag. I bought a cat in a bag. That means they didn't know what they bought. And they also say, I have other cats to whip. That means I have other things to do. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's just something that grew. My favorite in Spain, all noise and no walnuts, which we would say all noise and no action. So talk to your student about the idioms, make a list if you want. I mean, it can be really funny, and you know, a good time can be had. So it's challenging, yes. Don't worry about it with very, very beginning students, but work into it gradually. Okay.
Yeah, and the students actually love this. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.